To start off, we want to add some prominent lines that'll act as sort of the foundation for our snowy landscape. Here's what I mean. Starting from the right hand of the page, I'm going to draw a slow flowing line that kind of comes down and trails off just after the center of the page. From the right hand side, I'm going to do the same thing, but I want to vary the height of that line a little bit. It's going to come down and flow as well behind that other line. When we're drawing snow, we're working with contrast. We want to contrast sharp, jagged shapes with the flowing, natural, and organic shape of the snowbank. That's why these lines, it's important for them to feel kind of flowing and organic. That's going to contrast the shape of the cabin that we're going to draw behind it. When we're drawing the cabin, we're going to draw two vertical lines. Now, I'm drawing with pen. It's a permanent medium, and so I'm kind of dotting these out a little bit. But these lines should be around the same height. And then I'm going to kind of dot in a line in the middle of them. That's going to be the peak of the roof. I find dotting this line in really helps me kind of keep track of where it might be and where I need to draw to, and gives me a chance to draw two lines curving up to this dot. You can go over these lines a couple times if need be, but you probably guessed already this is going to be kind of the foundation of our cabin. And we can extend these lines a little bit down past the side of our cabin. Maybe on one side, we'll even continue it down a little bit more. We'll have a little porch there. The key with this perspective is that we want to have snow on top of the cabin. So usually we might draw the edge of the roof kind of sloping down here to show the cabin kind of fading away from us, but we're going to actually go from the opposite direction. And here's what I mean. To make the cabin three-dimensional, we're going to draw a little vertical line here behind that first one. You'll notice it's a little bit shorter than this first line and about 1.5 inches to the left. We want to mirror the roof that kind of sticks out right here to the left on the edge of this other line. Now we can connect the 2 points here. You'll notice now we have like an overhanging roof. This roof up here needs to be three-dimensional. However, there's snow that's going to be on top of the roof. In order to give the appearance of snow on this roof, we're going to draw a little bit of a line here that slopes upwards, and then we're bringing this line up and drawing some undulating curves that lead up about halfway up this roof line. So about halfway between this point here and the top of the roof. Then we want to make this line curve towards the top of the roof, curving over top of the roof, and then having a couple undulating curves on the other side before resting down on the edge of the roof. You'll see how the snow allows us to get away with some perspective mistakes, or allows us to not be super precise about the perspective we're drawing from. However, because there's a contrast here between this sharp triangle and the smooth flowing lines of the snow, it's clear that there is snow on top of the roof here. I think it makes it look a little bit more snow-laden this way. And to add a little bit more contrast and realism, I'm just darkening in this part of the roof here at the back, and maybe I'll add a thicker little bit here to make it appear like some of the snow has fallen off the roof. What we need to also add to give a little bit more contrast is maybe a little chimney here at the back of the cabin. So I'm drawing two vertical lines up. I'm going to connect them, and one more line on the left-hand side to make it three-dimensional. I've connected all those three lines. This will be a nice little chimney that's going to send smoke kind of pluming up into the distance. If we look over to the right-hand side of the cabin, we can see that there's this kind of stick going out to the right of the cabin. And we know it's a roof, but what we do know as well is we'd see the underside of the roof from our vantage point. That's why we want to kind of mirror this angle and draw the roof kind of sloping back into the distance. This roof slopes back, creating a sharp triangle on the right-hand side of our cabin. And we can also draw one more line here on the right-hand side showing the bottom of the roof that we'd see from our vantage point being slightly underneath this cabin. Why don't we shade this in to add some more contrast here between the cabin and the snow that's on top of it. As well, since it's an underside of a roof, it would be more in shadow. Next, we're going to add some windows and doors before we think about trees and other elements to really instill the snowy vibe in our scene. You know, we associate snow with kind of piling up here in Canada, and that's going to be true with our cabin here. We're not going to draw the bottom of a door because it's obstructed by snow, but we are going to draw two vertical lines on the left-hand side of the front of our cabin. I can connect those lines, making them a long rectangle here. And if you look at most doors, you notice that the mantle and the top of the door extends a little bit beyond the sides of the doors, especially when it comes to older cabins like this. We can then add a little circle for a doorknob and a little window. This window will be a little square here with a little cross section. I think that's looking pretty cute. What we want to do as well is add a larger window to the left or to the right of this cabin. I'm going to draw that similar kind of rectangular shape. A little bit large for a cabin like this, but hey, I like big windows. I want to draw a little mantle or window ledge underneath it. And then I'm going to do the same thing. And I mean, you can add more details if you wish. For our purposes, I'm just going to do a simple cross-section window here. And then I'm going to add some small details, just a little bit of snow kind of sloping up to the bottom of that window. To really give the snow vibes, we're going to draw some of this porch that is kind of obscured by snow. First, let's add some supporting structure here. So I'm drawing two little beams that kind of slide downward, and then a horizontal beam that connects to the house. You'll see how this alone has really given a lot more dimension to this cabin by making it appear like there is more of a roof, like these beams are supporting a little overhang balcony. What we can do is add another little window here, vertically up and vertically up, making sure that the top side of the window slants backwards on the same angle as the roof. We can then do what we did in the front of the house, drawing a cross-section window with the horizontal crossbar here sloping backwards the same angle as the roof, and shading in the left-hand side of this window a little bit, because from our vantage point we would see that left-hand side a little bit more than the right-hand side, which would be obstructed by the side of the window. Now, before we talk about other elements in the drawing, let's add some texture to the cabin itself. I'm drawing freehand, and I find the best way to add repeating shapes, like in this case wood, is draw a line across the middle. And then I'm going to be dividing the shape in half, continuing to divide each space that I create in half. This helps us eyeball the distance between these planks and allows us to be a little bit more regular with our perspective scene. For the beams on the side, we want them to slant back towards the back of the cabin on the same angle as the roof. We also want to draw some vertical beams downwards, or vertical lines downwards. Just a couple. These are going to be long wooden beams, but that adds a little bit of realism to our drawing here. Now let's add some trees before we go back and add some shading to our winter scene. When I'm adding trees to a drawing or other elements around a focal point, this main part of the drawing, I want them to contribute to and kind of guide the eye back towards this middle part of the drawing. So I'm going to draw an evergreen tree, but first I'm going to kind of dot in a vague outline of the trunk that I'm going to follow. It's going to be kind of sloping towards the middle of the drawing, and I'll also draw in another one here behind the tree and maybe one further back. This framing helps guide the eye towards the middle of our drawing. If I added trees too far out to the left or to the right, it might distract and make the drawing feel a little bit too sparse. I rather keep it, complex and a little bit more kind of detail heavy in the middle of our drawing. For the first of these trees, let's begin with drawing some lines downward. These lines should get a little bit less angled and longer as they come down towards the ground here. And they shouldn't be the same on either side. They can be a little bit uneven. They slope downward at a nice angle. When I'm going back over these, I can now kind of scribble in some connecting lines. You notice that they slope downwards, and then I'm scribbling in these lines that kind of go back towards the tree. Slope downs, and then scribble messy lines that go backwards. You notice that there's not a lot of sharp angles with these tree branches. That's intentional because we're going to add a little bit of snow that's kind of covering them up, making them look all nice, cute, and cozy. Let's do that as well to these other trees here. They're a little less of an angle, but even still, lines that slope down and kind of curve softly down towards the snow. Having the cabin kind of obscure these two trees on this side really does help with the idea of creating space and more dimension to our drawing, making it appear like we're in a three-dimensional area. Now, this tree is covered with snow, but we still want to add some shading and some kind of indication that there's some tree branches underneath it. To do that, I'm now using short downward strokes on each of the branches. On the areas that we scribbled underneath here, I'm adding some small kind of pen scribbles to give the idea of shading. These pen scribbles kind of go upwards up the branch a little bit, irregularly, to kind of show that there's some areas of shadow underneath all the snow that has fallen. And it's important to remember that I'm keeping my pen strokes really tight, really small, really short. And I can add some in the interior of the tree too, sloping down on either side of that central line that I've drawn. And again, this is why it's good for that line to really remain pretty sparse, so we don't really see it in this final product. When we now kind of approach the bottom of the tree, we can add a little bit more shading, making sure that we're adding some contrast between the tree and the soft flowing line of the snow. It's this texture we can now repeat on the other elements here, on the other trees, making sure that the lines we draw, sloping down either side, getting more distinct and lighter as they go backwards into the scene. We want to remember that this scene we need it to be three-dimensional. We need it to have some space and depth. That's why this scribble would get a little bit less distinct, making it appear like these trees are farther away from the viewer. We have these three primary trees, but why don't we add a little bit of a background here, showing that we're in a more of a forested area that we can add some shading to really contrast the shape and the tones of these trees here. Now, I've added some vertical, kind of craggy, spindly little bits behind here. Maybe they're trees, maybe they're mountains. But the key is that I'm going to now add some hatching, some shading, some lines that kind of go sideways, making sure that I don't obstruct the white snow. Really adding some contrast to the snow and to the trees that I've drawn. Now, depending on your style, you can darken this stuff in even darker if you like. Maybe pitch black. I like keeping it a little bit lighter here. We can go over this again before we're done this drawing. I mean, what do we need to do now? Well, the thing with drawing is that we can break the rules. We can add light, we can add shadow, but the key is to have that contrast between shape and tone and color. I think for us, what if we make this a nice little Christmas Eve night scene? Drawing a little half moon in the sky. And some stars. And this moon is going to be casting some light downward onto our scene. This is where it's really fun to draw in ink, I think. That's why we can continue the hatching on the front of this cabin. So why don't we shade in the front of the cabin except for the windows. I'm going to add some shading here. Adding some contrast. Making sure that these wooden, non-snowy areas of the drawing really contrast the snow, the pillowy light stuff that is on top of the cabin and in front of the cabin as well. Shading in everything except for this window, I think kind of gives the impression that there is some light, some warmth inside the cabin. And I think that can be kind of an effective place to leave our drawing. Since the moon would be shining downward, most of this side of the cabin would be in shadow as well. We've now developed a nice contrast between the snow, between the moon, between the trees, and with this lovely little cabin. There are so many ways we could go with this drawing, and I think one could be adding shadows to the trees. You know, this tree would be in shadow, so adding a nice little wash of shadow here over top of most of this tree. That can be a really effective tool for adding some interest to our drawing. We can do the same to this tree as well, making sure that the side of it that is facing away from that moon, which is casting light, is shadowed or darker. Drawing with pen is all about creating contrast, and I think It's a really satisfying part about doing these small little drawings, that we can really focus on drawing things simply, but creating lots of contrast to really make the scene pop. I hope you enjoyed this little drawing tutorial, and if you did, drop me a comment underneath and follow along for more of the same. I really love drawing. I hope you do too. I'd love to answer any questions you might have about drawing techniques, materials, or drawing practices underneath. But above all else, I hope you keep drawing. Thank you so much for watching.